I think that's her way of saying, don't be long. All right, I got 20 minutes, so here we go. All right, how y'all doing this morning? Good? All right, have you stayed dry? Anybody experiencing flooding yet? You know, today we're going to be talking about the power of the tongue. My mother told me once upon a time that I had the ability and the gift of gab. That I am one of these people that if I begin to talk to you, you might as well get comfortable. Because we're going to be there a while. But I will just say this. Over the years, I have learned to give you an out. Every 10 minutes, I will give you the opportunity to break the conversation. It is your own fault if you don't take it. I'll give you a chance to run, but that's up to you. Thank you. Whew. I've already talked so much this morning, I'm dry. But I want you to think about how we use our tongue. You know, today we read from James and he talks about the power of the tongue, how it can be used for praise and glory, and how it can be used for the destruction of man. How we can use it to hurt people. How many of you have heard someone say something to you that hurt you to your soul? That you really felt hurt from it? How many of you have had people who have been hurt by you? How many of you honestly didn't realize it? Yeah, I sometimes approach things with what I like to call the sledgehammer method. I smack it real hard and don't realize the kind of damage I leave in the wake. You know, there are no knickknacks in my house because when I turn the corner, I swing wide and things get broken. So that has more to do with being fluffy than anything else. But my words have the same kind of action. I'm big, I'm loud, I'm out there, and I'm trying to do what God is asking me to do. But I often, with carelessness of my own actions, hurt one another. I hurt people, and I don't generally intend to do so. You know, I love what I do, but I will just say this. Sometimes words just fly out for no reason at all. And sometimes, like the other day, I was preparing for the flood, and I was out in the yard, and I was putting down some drain tile, trying to run water away. I got this idea that if I run the water away from the house, that it won't go into my house. And I won't have to suck it up with a vacuum cleaner. So I was out there working in the yard, and I was sitting there, and I was putting the pipe down, and I was moving some rocks. And I moved some rocks, and then I noticed these things crawling on my arms, and it took me a few seconds to realize what was happening. But then I looked down, and I had about 30 yellow jackets on me. Now, I will just say this. It was probably a very comical sight, and I'm surprised I'm not on YouTube, and I might be. You might have to look and see if it's out there or not. But as I began to scream and run through my yard, and I will just say to you, I'm pretty certain that I didn't throw out any bad words, but at the time, I was stripping almost nude, trying to get the bees out from in my clothes. And this is not what you want to see running through your house, through your yard, in a pair of sneakers and shorts as he's stripping off his shirt, running through the neighborhood.
Totally missed it.
Everybody missed it. I'm thankful. Seriously, I'm surprised I'm not on YouTube because I'm sure it was rather funny. But I want y'all to know I ran for like 100 yards and I was still getting stung. Last count was about 15. But that's what happens when you're not paying attention. I looked down and I was like, that's a bunch of bees. and then they started. But, sometimes things can be said that we wish we could take back. Now, obviously, being stung by bees and running through the neighborhood screaming like a crazy man was probably not one of the examples probably best used, but we often have moments in our lives where we say things that hurt one another. So how, as Christians, do we deal with this? And here in James talks about how can fresh water and salt water come out of the same spring. How many of y'all know people who have salty language, as my grandmother would call it? Salty language? Anybody know a person that has salty language? How many of you have ever spoke ill of another person? Yeah. I'm notorious for getting people, believe it or not, it doesn't matter how many crosses you put on your car, people still cut you off. And you swing up by them and you go, God bless you. And you look at them and you say, bless their hearts, because that's all you can say. I try to teach my children at school that there is no use for those types of words where you use things to hurt other people's feelings. And the scriptures here, it talks very plainly about brothers and sisters. This should not be. Can both fresh water and salt water flow from the same spring? So what about this can we do? As Methodists, and those of you who did in my class, John Wesley spent a lot of time. His brother started this group and organization when in college that spent time praying with one another every day, and they became studiers of the Bible and studiers of the faith. And part of John Wesley's great contributions to the Methodist Church was his organization and his understanding that this is habit. You come to church out of habit and the love of Christ, and that it is necessary for us to build our relationship with Christ. As reading our Bible is as important as showing up to church, as showing up to Sunday school, as participating in singing. How many of y'all enjoy singing? Yeah. Doing those things, that is part of being like Christ. See, we are flawed, and we have to practice at being like Christ. And part of the thing that we have to work at is what we say and what we do. I'd like to ask you, if someone came up to you today, how would they tell that you are a United Methodist? How would they tell that you were even Christian? Is there some visible way or something that you're doing that will tell them that you're different? Is your behavior and actions telling others who you stand for each and every day? Is what you say to your friends and your community, are they reflective of what Christ would have us say or do? I mean, not every aspect of life will be about Christ, but does your world revolve around thinking about, and what I'm doing, is this in accordance to what God would want us to do? I used to work construction for almost 20 years. And the men that I worked with, most of them were, honestly, some of them actually were sailors at one point in time. I had a couple guys that worked in the Navy. Anybody here in the Navy at any point? No? Okay. But some of the guys, the old thing say they cuss like a sailor. Well, I've met some sailors. And I'm going to tell you, some of the things that they say, some of the things that people say, how do we change that? When I became a school teacher, I had to retool my brain, because the things that I would say to the construction worker guys would definitely not fly with a 14-year-old in the classroom. You can imagine, I'm sure. I'm sure some of the behavior that I participated in before becoming a school teacher was probably not that of a Christ-like behavior. So how do you change? Well, first and foremost, we have to recognize that we can't have salt water coming from a fresh spring. That our words have consequences, and that they cannot come back. That once you have said them, they're out there forever. How many of you have been hurt by someone before? How many of you remember being hurt by someone? See, once it is out there, you can't bring it back. You can apologize for it, and you can promise never to do it again. But the proof will be in the pudding, in your actions. In your actions day to day. Realizing that to live as Christ would have us to live. That it is part of our discipline. John Wesley would tell us that we would need to concentrate on being Christ-like. Studying our scriptures. Understanding what it means to be a Christian. People should be able to look at us and tell that we are Christians. That when we go out in public, that they can feel the love of Christ from us. That we're not saying things to hurt one another. And that we're not purposely going out of our way to cause them grief or harm. We should also be standing up for Christ and letting people know that we are Christians. Because on the outside surface, you can't tell that a person's Christian. And you can't tell that they're Methodist or Baptist on the outside. It is only through our actions in which Christ will be seen and revealed to them through us. This week, when you're out there and about, are you taking time to notice everybody? Those of you who are my Facebook friends saw that I put up a little post the other day. I thought it was really kind of interesting. It was two young gentlemen. They walked up to a homeless man outside of a music store. And he looked pretty rough. And they sat down beside the man and they asked him what was going on. Why was he sitting there? And he was panhandling. He was trying to raise enough money to get a guitar. That's how he made his living, was being a street performer. And his guitar had gotten broken and he was out of money. His clothes were ripped and torn. He was filthy. Honestly, you probably can imagine that he probably smelled. And they asked him why was he outside the store. Had he gone in the store? And he said he'd gone in the store, but the people in the store had run him off. Told him that he couldn't stay there if he wasn't buying anything. Now, for those of you who know me, I'm a musician. I go into music stores all the time and never buy anything. I pick up my favorite wish list, I take it down, and I pet it, go, my precious, someday you shall be mine. There's nothing wrong with this. Charlie will tell you right now, every guitar is its own baby. Every one sounds different. There's no such thing as two equal guitars. And I guarantee you, if you ask a drummer, he'll say the same thing. Why do you have 10 snares? Because each one sounds special. We go in and we look at the instruments and we play them and we spend time. Honestly, my wife could drop me off and come back 4 hours later and she's just rolled her eyes. I go into the I call it the humidor, but the room where they keep it hermetically sealed so that the moisture and stuff with all the guitars hanging on the wall. And I'm like, I shall visit you all, my children. And I can spend hours there. And never once had I been asked to leave. You see, those gentlemen that ran that store asked him to leave because the guy didn't look like he had money. And they ran him off because they thought that he may run away business because he smelled. So he was outside the panhandle, and these two guys sit down beside him, and they ask him his story. And the guy tells them their story, and he says, I'm just trying to raise enough money to buy another guitar so I can make a living, so I can have a place to sleep and food to eat, and that he didn't have anything. And he really looked like he had nothing. And they told the guy, come on with us, let's go in, let's go take a look. He said, they brought him into the store and they walked him around, and the guy picked up a modest guitar and they asked him, he says, do you like that guitar? And he says, oh yeah, it looks just like the one I used to have that got broke. And they said, do you want it? And they bought him the guitar. They bought him the guitar in a case. Now, I don't know whether those guys were Christian or not. It came from a video called Goldcast. And it's one of these ones where they do inspirational videos on how we should treat one another and how we should talk to one another. And the thing that really inspired me is that first and foremost, they looked at this guy who was dirty, who you could look at the video and tell he smelled. You didn't have to be there. And they looked at him and they saw him. And through their actions, they showed that they cared about him. They didn't speak harshly. They could have been like many of us who saw people like this on the side of the street corners sitting there, hungry, starving, poor, dirty, filthy, and pretended that he didn't exist. And I guarantee you that day, he probably had hundreds of people walk by him on the busy street who never saw him because they didn't want to see him. And here's two guys. The guitar was $300 and some. And yes, that is a sizable amount of money to give to someone. But between these two guys, they had it. It was money they did have to spend. And they spent it on the man, and they bought him that guitar. And the smile on that young man's face as he received that guitar, knowing that he now could start panhandling again and could start being a street performer again instead of being someone just standing on the corner saying, I'm hungry. I think more importantly here is that, yeah, he got a guitar out of this deal, but those guys saw him. Saw him. As we go out in the world, do we see the people around us? Are we so busy that we don't notice their pain? How many of you have ever seen a coworker that you knew was having a rough time? Didn't know what was going on, but you could tell. How many of y'all have seen that before? Did you say something? Did you ask them, is everything okay? When a person treats you badly, is your first defense to say something bad back? Is that your first move? Is that what Christ would want us to do? This is where the habit comes in. This is where, as we study Christ, as we try to emulate Christ's example, where it becomes easier over time. My wife will tell you I don't generally use bad words anymore. At one point in time in our marriage, I'm sure that half my vocabulary consisted of 4-letter words. Especially if I came home with a busted up finger. I went 10 years without all my fingernails. I was horrible with a hammer. I don't know why I ever went into construction. And screws were even worse. You ever had a screw jump pop off on you and hit you? All them things would get a hold of you. And I used a lot of bad words. But I don't anymore. Habit. I'm hoping that I went through the yard yesterday as those bees were stinging me. No, the day before yesterday as the bees were stinging me. Going, oh, cherries and flowers. Holy blessing, just help me. I'm not sure if I did, but if I did my discipline right, maybe it wasn't as bad as I think it was. I think if you could run through the yard being stung and can hold, as my mother would say, hold that tongue. I want y'all to think about what you say this week. What you say to each other. And more importantly, to people you don't speak to. Why don't you speak to them? Why don't you show them God's love each and every day? Through your words, through your example, through your Christian discipline. Study, live, learn, and show the love of Christ every day. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, be with us this week, Lord, as we go out into the world. Lord, we ask that you help us to say the right words, that you give us your thoughts, and Lord, that you help cleanse our hearts so that we can be better examples. Lord, may we be pure springs of your love and grace to the world. Lord, may we not destroy our fellow friends and neighbors. Lord, may we be inspirations. May we go out into the world and teach one another the love of Christ and show your example to all those who meet us. Lord, let us be your example to the world. In Christ's blessed name we pray.